The phone rang while I was setting the table for one. Mrs. Hartwell, this is Ethan from Royal Classic Motors. I'm calling to confirm the sale authorization for your Jaguar E-Type. My breath stopped. What sale? I asked. The 1970 Jaguar E-Type, he said. It's registered under your name. Your son completed the paperwork this morning. For a moment I couldn't speak. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. The cup in my hand slipped and shattered on the floor. My son? I finally said. You mean Matthew Hartwell? Yes, ma'am, the voice replied. He said you approved the sale, that you needed the funds for travel expenses. I pressed the phone closer. That is not true. I didn't authorize anything. Ethan hesitated. I see. The payment has already been processed, but I can freeze the transfer if you confirm this now. Do it, I said quickly. Don't release that car. The call ended, leaving a heavy silence in its place. I turned toward the garage door. My heart was beating too fast. I pushed it open and stepped into the dim light. The scent of metal and oil still lingered, but the space was empty. Richard's Jaguar was gone. I walked forward slowly, as if expecting it to reappear. All that remained was a faint rectangle of clean concrete and the memory of its polished shine. I could still picture Richard bent over the hood, his hands steady, his eyes patient. That car was not a toy. It was his legacy. He spent years restoring it after his retirement. Every Sunday morning he would start the engine, smile, and say, "Listen to her, Margaret. Still runs like she was built yesterday." I had promised him I would keep it safe, and now Matthew had sold it. I sat on the workbench, trembling. My son had been distant for months. Busy, distracted, always talking about new business ideas and trips with his wife, Lila, but I never imagined he would touch something that wasn't his. My phone buzzed, a new message from him. Hey, Mom, if the dealership calls, don't worry, it's handled. I'll explain later. Handled. I stared at that word until my eyes burned. He thought this was handled. He thought I wouldn't find out what he had done. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to stay calm. Anger would do nothing now. I needed proof. I needed to know every detail before confronting him. I walked back into the house and opened the drawer where Richard kept the car papers. Everything was still there. Ownership title, insurance, registration, all in my name. No transfer, no authorization. So how did Matthew sign it? The phone rang again. It was Ethan. Mrs. Hartwell, one more thing, he said carefully. Would you like to know the buyer's reason for purchase? It was rather unusual. I swallowed hard. Yes. The buyer mentioned your son told him the funds were for a vacation, a trip to Dubai. My stomach turned. Dubai. Lila had been bragging about that destination on social media for months. She once joked that Matthew would find a way to make it happen. So that was the way. He sold his father's car to impress his wife. I sat down, unable to move. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. Not because of the money, but because of what that car represented. Richard's fingerprints were still on the steering wheel. His initials were engraved on the keychain. Every part of that car held a memory. Matthew knew that. I remembered the last time he sat in the car. It was the week after Richard's funeral. He said, "Mom, one day I'll take care of this car." Dad would have wanted that. I believed him. Now the only thing left was silence. The kind of silence that feels like a wall between mother and son. I walked back to the table, swept up the broken cup, and set the phone beside me. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was clear. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to make sure he understood what he had done. The car was more than metal. It was memory, loyalty, and respect. And when someone sells something sacred, they sell more than property. They sell trust. The dealership had stopped the transfer, but I knew it was temporary. If I didn't act fast, the car would be gone forever. I picked up the phone again and stared at Matthew's message. I'll explain later. No, I thought. You'll explain now. I typed one line and hit send. Matthew, call me immediately. Then I whispered to the empty room, Richard, I'll fix this. The phone remained silent. The sun was setting through the window, casting long shadows across the table. I sat there waiting, replaying the conversation in my head. The words authorization and sale kept echoing. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. And if I had to remind my son what family and legacy truly meant, I would. Because some lessons cannot be taught through comfort. They are taught through consequence. But when the dealer said why Daniel sold it, I realized this wasn't an accident. It was betrayal. Would you confront your child immediately or wait until you knew every detail? The garage had always been Richard's space. The scent of oil and polish still lingered, faint but familiar. The tools hung neatly on the wall, untouched since the day he died. I stepped inside and felt the air shift. It was quiet but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that follows loss. I looked at the empty spot where the Jaguar used to sit. The clean rectangle of floor looked like a wound. That car had been Richard's pride. Every Sunday he would wipe the hood with an old flannel rag, humming softly to himself. He would polish until he saw his reflection and say, "Perfection, Margaret, is in the patience." I sat on the stool he used to sit on. The leather was cracked but firm. I ran my fingers across the surface and imagined his hands there, steady and sure. The ache that had dulled after. His death returned sharper than before. This wasn't just about a car. It was about everything he stood for: discipline, loyalty, care. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Daniel. "Where is your father's car?" I watched the typing bar flash for a moment, then disappear. No reply. I waited. Minutes passed, then hours. Nothing. The silence was heavier than any answer could have been. Out of habit, I opened my social media feed. The first photo I saw made my stomach twist. Daniel and his wife Tessa were smiling at the airport. She held a passport, he held her hand. The caption read, "Finally off to Dubai, dreams come true." The comments were full of hearts and compliments. "You two deserve it." "Power couple goals." I stared at the photo until the words blurred. Dubai. I whispered it out loud, feeling bitterness rise in my throat. "You sold his car for that?" I closed my eyes. Images flashed. Richard bent over the engine, teaching Daniel how to change a belt. "One day this will be yours," he had said, but not to show off. To remember. Apparently, Daniel remembered nothing. I stood up and walked to the shelf where Richard kept his records. Each box was labeled carefully. Parts receipts, manuals, insurance. He had been that kind of man, meticulous, proud of what he built. The empty space in front of me wasn't just a missing car. It was a broken promise. I sat back down and thought about the call. The dealership said Daniel told them I needed the money. That I had approved it. That part kept replaying in my head. Why lie like that? He could have asked me for help. He could have told me the truth. Instead, he used my name. That cut deeper than the sale itself. I imagined Richard hearing this. He would have clenched his jaw and said nothing, but I would have seen the hurt in his eyes. He trusted Daniel to protect what mattered. Now I didn't know if I could trust him at all. I looked at the clock. 9:37 p.m. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that listens to your thoughts and feeds them back sharper. The car wasn't gone by accident. It had been planned. And worse, it was funded by lies about me. I picked up the phone again. Still no message from Daniel. Outside, the night air was cold. The moonlight slipped through the small garage window, hitting the metal shelf where Richard's nameplate still sat. R. Hartwell and Son. That and Son used to make me proud. Now it made me sick. I whispered into the darkness, "You didn't just sell a car, Daniel. You sold your father's memory." I stood there a while longer, letting the quiet press against me until it almost hurt. Then I turned off the light and closed the door. But the worst part wasn't that he sold it. It was what he told the dealership about me. "Would you forgive, or would you make them feel what they took from you?" The email came early in the morning. The subject line read, "Requested documents, Jaguar E-Type sale." My hands trembled as I opened it. There it was. My name printed neatly on the sale agreement. My signature beneath it. Except it wasn't mine. The loops were wrong. The slant was different. It looked copied, stiff, like someone had practiced it. Attached were more files. Scanned IDs, authorization letters, even a note claiming I wanted to liquidate old memories. That phrase hit me like a physical blow. Liquidate old memories. I stared at it again. My throat tightened. Whoever wrote those words didn't understand grief. They didn't know what it meant to lose a man like Richard and still find comfort in the smell of his car's leather seats. I called the dealership immediately. The same voice from before answered, polite, careful. "This is Margaret Hartwell," I said. "I didn't authorize that sale." There was silence on the line. Then the dealer sighed. "Mrs. Hartwell, your son said it was for your own good. He said you wanted closure, that you were ready to move on." I felt the room spin. "He told you that?" Yes, ma'am. He also mentioned you'd been emotional lately and didn't want to handle the paperwork yourself. I gripped the edge of the counter. My knuckles went white. He forged my signature, I said quietly. I'm sorry, the dealer replied. His tone softened. He came across as sincere. We had no reason to doubt him. When I hung up, the silence in the house was unbearable. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the clock tick, the faint creak of the wood floor, all the sounds that fill a home when you live alone. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my phone. Daniel's number was still pinned at the top of my messages. I called him. He didn't answer. I called again. On the third ring, he picked up. Mom, he said, his voice slow, cautious. Daniel, I said, keeping my tone steady. Where's your father's car? He hesitated. I was going to tell you. I meant to surprise you. Surprise me? With money for the house. You've been struggling. I cut him off. Don't lie to me again. The line went quiet. I could hear faint traffic in the background, voices, laughter. He wasn't at home. I said, You forged my name? You sold your father's car without permission? He tried to sound calm. It was just sitting there, Mom. I thought it would help. You never even drive it. It wasn't about driving it, I said. It was about remembering him. He said nothing. Where are you? I asked. There was another pause, then a low sigh. We're out of town. I pulled up his social media again while he spoke. There it was, another photo posted hours ago. Daniel and Tessa standing in front of the Burj Khalifa, smiling, sunglasses on. The caption read, Now, chasing dreams together. My stomach turned. Dubai, I said quietly. He froze. Mom, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said. He started to speak. Again, but I ended the call. I didn't trust myself to hear another excuse. The house felt colder than before. I looked at Richard's old photo on the mantel. He had grease on his cheek in that picture, standing beside the car, proud and alive. I reached out and touched the frame. I'm sorry, I whispered. He doesn't understand what he's done. That night, I printed every document the dealer sent. Each page was proof of betrayal, proof that Daniel had traded sentiment for luxury. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept circling back to one thing, not the car, not even the forgery, but the reason behind it. He didn't sell the Jaguar to help me. He sold it to show off. He sold legacy for luxury, and he thought I'd never find out. He sold legacy for luxury, and he thought I'd never find out. The next morning, I drove across town to Heritage Auto Gallery, the place where Richard had once spent hours talking to collectors. It looked the same. Clean glass walls, polished floors, sunlight bouncing off hoods of cars that gleamed like mirrors. But walking through those doors felt different now. A young receptionist looked up. Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you? I'm here to see Mr. Patel, I said. Tell him it's Margaret Hartwell. Her polite smile faltered. She made a quick call, murmured something, then gestured toward an office at the back. He'll see you right away. Mr. Patel stood when I entered. A short man in his 60s, sharp suit, but his eyes gave away discomfort. He extended his hand hesitantly. Mrs. Hartwell, I was expecting you might come. I didn't shake his hand. I sat down. You sold my husband's Jaguar without my consent. He let out a slow breath and sat across from me. I was told you had approved the sale verbally through your son. He said the car had too much sentimental weight for you to handle the paperwork. That's a lie, I said. He nodded slowly. I understand that now. He opened a folder on his desk and turned it toward me. Inside were the sale documents, the same ones I'd seen by email. My forged signature glared up from the page. Your son said it was a family decision, he continued, that everyone had agreed to let go of sentimental clutter, I believe were his words. I closed my eyes briefly. Sentimental clutter, the same language again. My grief reduced to a nuisance. I steadied my voice. You should have called me directly. He looked embarrassed. You're right. But he had all the right paperwork. Identifications, signed authorizations, even your insurance information. It all looked legitimate. We followed standard procedure. He reached for another file and handed it to me. Here's a copy of everything. The buyer hasn't finalized the transfer yet, which might be fortunate for you. Inside the folder were photos of the car, taken at the dealership. Seeing the Jaguar parked under bright lights tagged "Sold" made my stomach twist. I said quietly, "That car was my husband's heart. He rebuilt it piece by piece after the war. He taught Daniel how to change its oil before he could drive." Mr. Patel's expression softened. "I understand, Mrs. Hartwell, truly." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "But there's something you should know about the buyer." I looked up sharply. "What about them?" He glanced toward the glass wall to make sure no one was listening. "Your son wasn't selling to a stranger. The buyer knew him." My pulse quickened. "Who?" He hesitated again. "It's not my place to disclose client information, but I think you deserve the truth. The buyer is a private collector who runs in the same business circle as your daughter-in-law's family. The deal wasn't about money. It was about status." For a moment, I couldn't speak. He continued, "They were bragging that they'd secured a classic that most collectors would fight for. Your son even mentioned using the funds for an overseas trip." I sat back, every piece clicking into place. The Paris photos, the fake signature, the lies. This wasn't desperation or need. It was ego. I stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Patel. You've been honest. I appreciate that." He nodded. "What do you plan to do?" I picked up the folder. "First, I'm getting my husband's car back. Then my son and I are going to have a conversation he won't forget." As I walked out, the sound of engines filled the air. Beautiful cars, each a work of love. But none of them mattered to me. Only one did. The one that carried my husband's memory and my son's shame. Mr. Patel leaned closer and whispered, "There's something about the buyer you need to know." Mr. Patel's words echoed as I stood in his office. The buyer wasn't a stranger. Someone in Tessa's circle had been involved, and that made it personal. He cleared his throat. "The buyer actually pulled out yesterday. He said something felt off about the sale. I think he suspected the paperwork was forged before we did." That surprised me. "So the car is still here?" He nodded. "Locked in the holding bay. The buyer was a collector, a man named Mr. Lennox. He deals in rare restorations and values provenance. He said your son was unusually insistent, trying to complete the sale before leaving the country. Mr. Lennox told me he didn't like the tone, so he asked for verification. When he learned your name was still on the title, he walked away." Mr. Patel slid a small business card across the desk. He said if you wanted the full story, you could call him directly. That night I sat by the kitchen window, the house quiet except for the ticking clock. The same kitchen where Richard and I used to talk about every big decision. Now I held the card, staring at the name. Charles Lennox, Vintage Acquisitions Linked. I dialed the number. A calm voice answered. "Lennox speaking." "This is Margaret Hartwell," I said. "You were in contact with my son about a Jaguar E-Type." There was a short pause. Yes. I had a feeling you'd call." His tone was steady, respectful. "First, I want you to know the car is safe. I refused the purchase once I realized something was off. Your son seemed nervous. He wanted the money transferred immediately." "What did he tell you?" I asked quietly. "He said his mother was struggling emotionally, that you wanted to sell the car to move forward but didn't want to handle the process yourself. He presented the sale as a favor, helping you let go." My stomach tightened. "That's a lie." "I gathered as much," Lennox said. He tried to play confident, but his story didn't add up. He didn't know enough about the car's history. When I mentioned the restoration details from the original build, he looked blank. That's when I called Mr. Patel to double-check the paperwork. Silence stretched for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Forgive me, Mrs. Hartwell, but I've seen this before. People sell sentimental things, not because they need to, but because they want to rewrite what they inherited, to make it theirs. Your son didn't sell a car. He sold a story." Those words hit me harder than I expected. Sold a story. After the call, I sat in the dark, watching the streetlights flicker outside. I thought about Richard's hands, the smell of the garage, the years spent preserving something beautiful, and then I thought of Daniel, my only child, turning it into a quick deal for a trip abroad. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd rewritten the memory of his father into a transaction. I pulled out my old photo album. There was Richard smiling next to the car the day he finished restoring it. In the background, a small boy with greasy hands, Daniel, holding a wrench too big for him. I traced that photo with my fingertip and whispered, You should have known better. The next morning, I called Mr. Patel. Keep the car locked. I'll handle the rest. He agreed. Take your time, Mrs. Hartwell. It's still registered in your name? Time, I thought, was exactly what Daniel didn't have. His lies were unraveling faster than he could hide them. The buyer's last sentence stayed with me. He didn't sell a car. He sold a story. They came back from Dubai 2 weeks later, golden from the sun, wrapped in smiles and expensive perfume. When they walked through my door, I could smell the money before they even spoke. Mom, Daniel said, hugging me quickly, we brought you something special. He handed me a silk scarf still in its boutique bag. Tessa picked it out. Real Burberry. Tessa's voice was smooth, practiced. You'd look lovely in it, Margaret. We thought you deserved a treat. I thanked them politely and went back to stirring the soup on the stove. My movements were steady, my breathing even. On the surface, everything looked normal. Inside, I was counting every second until they gave themselves away. We sat at the dining table like a family in a photograph. They spoke about the trip, the desert safaris, the hotel suite, the jewelry stores. Tessa gushed about how life-changing it was. Daniel smiled at her the whole time, proud and eager to please. I nodded and listened, letting them enjoy their story. I waited until the soup bowls were empty and the wine glasses half full. Then I rose slowly and went to the cabinet. When I came back, I carried a plain brown envelope. I set it in the center of the table. Daniel looked at it, puzzled. What's that? Open it, I said quietly. He hesitated, then pulled out the papers. His face paled as he read the first page. His fork clattered against the table. Tessa leaned forward. What is it? He didn't answer. He looked at me instead. Mom, where did you get this? From the dealership, I said. My voice was calm, but the room felt colder. They called to confirm the sale you authorized, only it wasn't me who signed these forms. Tessa's hand tightened on her glass. Daniel swallowed hard. I can explain. I folded my hands in front of me. Then do it. He stammered. I thought you might want to let go of the car. You've been sad for so long. I thought it would help you move forward. You thought selling your father's car would heal me? Tessa looked down at her plate, then spoke softly. It was my idea. I told him you were holding on to the past. The car was just sitting there collecting dust. We needed the money to... I cut her off. To go to Dubai? Her cheeks flushed. It wasn't about that. Daniel looked between us, lost. Mom, please. I didn't mean to hurt you. I stood and gathered the empty plates one by one. You forged my name, Daniel. You lied to the dealer. You lied to me. He tried to reach for my hand. I pulled it away. For years, I had seen my son as a man who simply struggled to find direction. But that night, I saw someone else, someone who chose pride over principle. When I looked at Tessa, her expression wasn't guilt. It was fear. Not of what she'd done, but of what I might do next. Her eyes darted between us, searching for a way to stay in control. The silence at the table was heavier than any argument. Finally, I said, You sold his memory for a plane ticket. I hope it was worth the view. Daniel lowered his head. Tessa said nothing. Daniel tried to speak, but Tessa's eyes told a different story. She was the one who pushed it. Tessa was the first to speak. Her voice was sharp at first, then cracked. Fine. Yes, I told him to sell it. I'm tired of that car sitting there like a shrine. It's depressing. I wanted a fresh start. Daniel looked at her in disbelief. Tessa? She snapped back. What? You said you'd do anything to make me happy. You were the one who kept saying we needed something new. He sank into his chair, face pale. I did it because you said you were ashamed of how we lived. You said your friends travel, their husbands surprise them. I wanted to give you something you'd brag about for once. The air in the room felt tight. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, So you both decided my memories were clutter. You traded a lifetime of love for a vacation photo. Daniel buried his face in his hands. Tessa folded her arms, defensive but trembling. I walked to the counter, picked up my phone, and dialed Mr. Patel. When he answered, I put it on speaker. Mr. Patel, I said, keeping my tone even, would you please repeat what you told me about the sale? There was a pause on his end. Then his voice came through clearly. Mrs. Green, your son presented documents that appeared to have your signature. Our verification system flagged it. When we contacted the buyer, they backed out because the paperwork didn't match. The transfer was frozen and the vehicle remains in your name. Tessa's mouth opened slightly. Daniel stared at the table. Mr. Patel continued, "We were waiting for your confirmation before taking legal steps. I'm glad you called when you did." I thanked him and ended the call. Tessa's confidence crumbled. Daniel looked up slowly, realization dawning. "The car? It's still yours?" "Yes," I said, "and it will stay that way." He exhaled, shaking his head as if he had finally woken from a fog. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of truth pressed against the room, stripping away excuses and pride. Tessa's voice came out small. "So, it's over?" I met her eyes. "No, it's not over. You tried to erase what you didn't understand. You both need to decide if you want to rebuild what's left, not of the car, but of your integrity." Daniel looked at me with tears forming. "Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness." I said quietly, "Forgiveness isn't free. You'll have to earn it, like your father earned every piece of that car." When the call ended, Daniel realized something. The car was still in my name. The next morning, I drove to the dealership. The Jaguar was still there, covered and untouched. When Mr. Patel rolled it out, the sunlight hit the faded paint, and I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. I ran my hand along the hood, whispering, "You're home now." Daniel arrived soon after, shoulders heavy, eyes red. He handed me an envelope. "It's the money from the sale. I'll return it all." I shook my head. "Keep it. I don't want your money. I want your effort." He looked confused. "Effort? You'll help me restore it again," I said. "Piece by piece, like your father did. You'll learn what work means, what legacy means. No shortcuts this time." He nodded, ashamed but determined. Tessa stood by the car door, arms crossed. "You're really making him do this?" "It's just an old car, for God's sake." I looked at her steadily. "That old car taught your husband discipline, respect, and patience. If you can't respect where he came from, you'll lose where you're going." Her eyes rolled, a dry laugh escaping her lips. "This is ridiculous." I didn't argue. I simply handed her a polishing cloth. "Then prove it's ridiculous. Help." She stared at the cloth for a moment before tossing it onto the hood. "I'm not wasting my time on this." Daniel turned sharply toward her. "Then don't." "But I will." That was the first time I saw him stand his ground without anger, calm, firm, like his father used to be. Over the next few weeks, Daniel came to the garage every evening. He sanded, scrubbed, and polished in silence. Sometimes I helped. Sometimes I simply sat and watched. The car began to look alive again. The old shine returned, and so did pieces of the man my husband had been. Tessa visited less and less. When she did, she watched quietly from the doorway, saying nothing. Then one evening she walked in holding that same polishing cloth. "Show me what to do," she said softly. I handed her a bucket of water and smiled. "Start with the small parts. They matter most." She laughed at first, but that laugh didn't last long. Weeks passed quietly. Every evening, Daniel came by after work. He stayed in the garage long after sunset, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his forehead. The first few days were clumsy. He didn't know where to start or what half the tools were for, but I didn't correct him right away. I let him learn, the same way Richard had once learned, by trying, failing, and trying again. Neighbors began to notice. Some stopped by with coffee, others with advice. The same faces that had watched Richard build the car decades ago now watched his son bring it back. There was something healing in that, a full-circle moment none of us expected. Daniel changed slowly. His words became softer, his tone more patient. He didn't check his phone every 5 minutes. He didn't make excuses. He worked in silence, focused. I could see Richard in him again, the calm determination, the quiet pride. One afternoon, I heard a car pull into the driveway. It was Tessa. She stepped out, no makeup, no jewelry, her expression thoughtful. She stood at the garage door watching Daniel wipe the hood of the Jaguar. After a moment, she said, "He told me you used to sit with his dad while he worked on this." I nodded. "Every weekend. They built it together. That car isn't about the drive. It's about the time." She looked down at her shoes. "I didn't understand that before." Daniel looked up at her, surprised. "You came?" She walked closer slowly, then picked up a wrench from the bench. "Show me what to do." He smiled faintly and guided her hand. Grease smeared her palm. She didn't flinch. For the first time in months, they worked side by side. No arguing, no pride, no distance. Only effort. Hours later, Daniel turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. The sound filled the garage like a heartbeat returning after silence. I felt tears gather. The neighbors clapped. Daniel's shoulders shook. Tessa covered her mouth, whispering, "It's beautiful." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The lesson had landed. When the engine finally started, it wasn't just the car that came back to life, it was family. The Jaguar sat gleaming in the garage again, like a heartbeat restored after a long silence. Every time I walked past it, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't pride, it wasn't even happiness, it was peace. Quiet, steady peace. Months had passed since the day everything unraveled. Daniel had changed. He still came by every Sunday, but not out of guilt anymore. He came because he wanted to. Sometimes he arrived with his children, sometimes alone. Either way, he always started his visit the same way, by walking straight to the garage. He would open the door, stand there for a few seconds, and let out a small sigh. Then he'd roll up his sleeves and check the engine, like Richard used to. The sound of the tools, the faint smell of grease, the rhythm of care, it reminded me that growth doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in quiet effort. The first few Sundays were awkward. The children were loud, asking too many questions about Grandpa's car. I didn't stop them. I wanted them to know who their grandfather was, not just through stories, but through what he built with his hands. "Grandpa built this?" My grandson Leo had asked once, his eyes wide. "Yes," I said. "Every bolt, every inch." "He didn't buy it ready, he made it ready." Leo nodded, touching the fender carefully, like it might speak back. In a way, it did. Daniel worked patiently. The arrogance that once filled his words was gone. In its place was humility. He no longer made excuses for his mistakes. He didn't try to explain away what he'd done. He simply worked. Sometimes in silence, sometimes humming the same tune Richard used to hum when fixing things around the house. Tessa started coming around after a while. The first time she looked nervous, unsure if she was welcome. I didn't make it easy for her, but I didn't shut her out either. She brought a thermos of coffee and stood by the doorway while Daniel worked. She didn't speak much, but I saw her watching. Really watching. One afternoon, she finally said, "I didn't understand what that car meant to you. Or to him." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to see if she meant it or if she was just trying to ease her conscience. But her tone was soft, real. "I thought it was just an old thing taking up space," she continued. "Now I see it wasn't the car, it was what it stood for." I nodded slowly. "Richard didn't build it for status," I said. "He built it because it reminded him of where he came from. Hard work, discipline, care." She looked down. "I see that now. I'm sorry." That apology didn't fix everything, but it mattered. It wasn't rehearsed or defensive. It was simply human. I accepted it, not because I wanted her forgiveness, but because I didn't want bitterness to live in this house any longer. Daniel kept his promise. He repaid the dealership, not with money, but with time. He volunteered to help them restore another vintage model, learning about mechanics the way Richard once learned, through curiosity and failure. Mr. Patel later told me Daniel had become one of their most dependable helpers. That meant more to me than any repayment could. By the time summer turned to autumn, the Jaguar looked brand new. The deep blue paint reflected the afternoon sun perfectly. The leather seats smelled like old memory and new beginnings. I could almost see Richard sitting behind the wheel, his hand resting on the gear stick, that small smile of pride tugging at his mouth. One Sunday, Daniel turned the key, and the engine came to life for the first time in months. The sound filled the air, strong and steady. We both stood there listening. The children clapped and cheered. Tessa cried quietly. Daniel turned to me and said, "You and Dad would have loved this." I nodded. He would have loved that you learned what he was trying to teach. We didn't need to say more. The air between us had already said everything. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began taking the car out for short drives on Sunday mornings. He never went far, just around the neighborhood, the same route Richard used to take when he wanted to clear his mind. He always came back, parked carefully, and cleaned it afterward. He told me he wanted his kids to ride in it when they were old enough to understand what it meant. Not as a toy, but as a story. I decided to keep the registration in my name. Not out of control, but out of respect. It was still Richard's car, and I was still his keeper. But now, Daniel had earned the right to share it. Sometimes I sit in the passenger seat, watching him drive with the same cautious precision his father had. And when we stop at the old lookout point, the same one Richard used to take me to after long weeks of work, I feel something close to forgiveness. I never wanted revenge. I only wanted understanding. And in his own way, Daniel gave me that. Not with words, but with change. Tessa has softened too. She brings flowers to Richard's grave now, unprompted. The first time she did, she left a small note. I found it later, tucked behind the headstone. It said, "Thank you for the man you raised. I almost ruined him." That broke something in me, in a good way. Sometimes pain has to complete its circle before it turns into wisdom. Now, when the house grows quiet in the evenings, I walk to the garage and rest my hand on the car's hood. It's cool and smooth. I can almost hear Richard's voice in my head saying, "You did the right thing, Maggie." And I whisper back, "I tried." The car doesn't just represent him anymore. It represents all of us, the mistakes, the forgiveness, the second chances. People talk about losing things that can't be replaced. I thought I lost my husband, then my son, and then the last piece of memory we shared. But I was wrong. What I lost was trust, and what I gained was truth. Love and legacy can be stolen, but they can also be rebuilt if truth leads the way. We can't control what others take from us, but we can decide what lessons they walk away with. The dealership's call didn't destroy my family. It rebuilt it through honesty, humility, and consequence. If you believe respect must be earned, not inherited, subscribe for more real-life stories of truth, redemption, and family.